Welcome to Constructive Thinking, a podcast by the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. My name is Stephen Hamilton, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for PCAC. Today we'll be talking with Sam Duncan from Wellington Advocacy on the Ontario Fall Economic Statement, the federal budget and how it relates to Ontario, as well as current political trends. This program was taped on November 13, 2025. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent.
Sam, this is your second time on the podcast. Welcome back. Today, I wanted to focus on a few things. The provincial budget and the federal budget were both recently tabled. Is there anything notable in the provincial budget that was tabled last week?
Thanks, Stephen. Look, I think there's a few things that are notable, and one thing that is maybe notable by absence in the provincial budget. I'll start with some of the notable things. I think first and foremost for the construction sector, the Ford government's commitment to over $200 billion in capital projects over the next 10 years is a tremendous amount of investment. You know, the Ford government has been building and then constantly expanding the amount of capital that they're putting out for public projects. I think this is very important. It's obviously necessary from a province building perspective, but also will help the construction sector right now. I think, you know, this provincial fall economic statement didn't have a lot new. Really, it's not a lot new. It's a steady as she goes. Where they do have money, they're putting it towards kind of programs and efforts to help mitigate the effects of Trump's tariffs on the Ontario economy. And so you see some money being set aside for businesses that are impacted negatively by the economic challenges coming from the Americans. But the thing that's really kind of not in there that I do think is kind of notable is really, you know, anything on the tax side, on the competitiveness tax side. They do signal that they are going to do a review of tax law in the province, but they also signaled that a couple of years ago and didn't have any output of that. So I think at a time when Canadian businesses, small, medium, and large, are all facing economic headwinds and real challenges, the tax burden in this province is quite high, and both at the personal and kind of business level. And so, you know, it was notable that they did not have any announcements on that. Really, even the minister and the premier, when asked in the lead up to the release, had kind of hinted that something might be coming, and there wasn't anything on that. And so that was notable for me.
One thing I noticed when I was reviewing the provincial budget is how much they're relying on the feds. So a lot of provincial priorities, if it's the Ring of Fire, if it's the tunnel under the 401, if it's Highway 413, there's either an explicit ask to change the regulatory environment to make sure those things get approved faster without duplication from the federal government, or an explicit ask for money in the case of the Ring of Fire as well. So I'm curious your take, how much they rely on the federal government. Obviously, this is an important relationship for the province, but that struck me as notable in this budget.
Okay, it's a very astute point, Stephen. I think one of the real political maneuvers that Doug Ford has done that I think doesn't get a lot of appreciation is how he's managed effectively to have the federal government continue to increase the amounts of transfers to the province to allow him to avoid making kind of cuts to programs and services on the fiscal side. As the expenditures of the province are rising, he's been able to secure significant amounts of federal funding to kind of offset the increase in spending that he's been doing at the provincial level, which has allowed him not to have to make cuts in ways that are politically controversial in the province. And so I think this has been a very smart and sophisticated approach that Ford has taken, both with Trudeau and again with Carney. At the same time, they do a great job of pushing the feds on duplicative regulatory processes and red tape while taking steps on their side to try to streamline things. And so I do think this is an area where they've effectively allowed federal incursion on the spending side to help mitigate their fiscal situation. At the same time, I've been able to put pressure on the federal government to try to lower the regulatory burdens, and it's worked very effectively for the premier in terms of politically here in Ontario.
I think that's an interesting point because if you look at the federal government, you see massive deficits year over year. and just increasing almost exponentially. Whereas in the province, last year they recorded a $1.1 billion deficit, fairly modest. And this year they're anticipating a $9.8 billion deficit. So I think the fiscal situation between the province and the feds is, I think, an interesting dynamic that people don't talk about as much. But certainly that's there. In terms of other spending, the Skills Development Fund, the government's either committed or spent $2.1 billion towards the Skills Development Fund. This has been in the news a lot lately. This has been a tremendously popular program in the construction industry generally across different unions, across different construction associations. It was introduced kind of in the middle of COVID when the government wanted to provide training opportunities for people to get work quickly, kind of outside of traditional training providers like colleges and universities. And since 2021, they've maintained it and it's expanded. Now, this has been in the news lately for some other reasons. Can you kind of speak to, I guess, the program itself, how you see it politically? Again, PCA, we have not received funding through it, but our union partner CLAC has, and many other unions have received funding towards it. But can you speak to a little bit about the politics around the Skills Development Fund and where you see it going in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Look, I think this fund has been tremendously successful. It's the government really should be applauded for taking a more direct and innovative approach to trying to solve our skills and labor shortage. I've been working in and around the government for over 15 years, and all 15 of those years, I've heard that there's a massive skills and labor shortage, and the governments from the federal and provincial level have tried ways to fix that through various government-run training programs or universities and colleges, and we still have the same problem. And so I think, it's great to see a government saying, like, let's work directly with organizations that will train and support people for jobs that we know are available because they either employ these people or partner with groups that do employ these people. And so I think the fund has been tremendously successful. I think, like any fund, is there going to be 100% success rate of these projects? No. Unfortunately, there's been, some instances that it looks like folks got funding for things that might have been a little bit nebulous. But at the end of the day, this government is committed to this fund. I think this fund is working tremendously successful. I could see them looking to maybe tighten some of the eligibility criteria as they move forward. Like, as you pointed out, Stephen, this was created during the pandemic. And I think it was really created to get money out the door as fast as possible and leave to ensure that, like, the program criteria were pretty open-ended so that folks could just actually get the money when they needed it really quickly. And I think it's wise for the government to kind of reconsider if that eligibility criteria needs to be tightened a bit in this environment post COVID. But I think for those organizations that have real strong track records of training and need, that will be no concern for them. In fact, it'll probably help ensure that more dollars from this fund can go to folks. So I think this fund will continue. I would expect some tightening of the criteria, but it's massively successful. And the politics of this, look, I think this is where there's like this disconnect between like the bubble of politics and real people, right? Like this feels like a little bit of opposition and the media kind of trying to find a way to go after the current government. The current government's super popular. There's not a lot of things that they're doing that people criticize them for. And so the media is always trying to find one where if you actually go talk to real everyday people, they want to see governments putting money in training with unions, with employers directly, and they're very supportive of this. So I think this is kind of at the political level, not something that will have any impact on the government, really. It takes up a lot of the noise inside the bubble.
I think a lot of people don't appreciate the apprenticeship system and training in construction generally has been kind of a static environment for really decades. And what this funding allows for is new opportunities outside of the traditional training providers, but also partnering with traditional training providers like colleges when there's a partner to provide funding that wasn't available before. So you can, make sure apprentices get trained faster to get their full journey person status. So it does provide it. I see it as complementary towards the training system that for a variety of reasons hasn't been adjusted or modernized too much over the last few decades. And so it really accomplishes a lot of things that I don't think a lot of people appreciate.
I think that's right. It's actually important to know too that a lot of the funding from the skills development fund actually comes through the federal labor market development agreements. And so this is money that is actually from the EI system that is used to be reinvested into training. And so typically that funding has gone to, I'll call them resume building skills and like other kind of soft skills. Like that's been typically where that funding has been directed at the training level. And so to your point, like the fact that this can be funding that is actually workers paying into it themselves, right? And being re kind of purposed for innovative and new training models that is new dollars to find new ways to increase apprenticeship completion and numbers is like super helpful. And I think it would be great if other provinces frankly looked at this model as one to replicate across the country.
I think I want to end on discussing kind of broader political trends federally and provincially and how those things intersect. But my next question's around the federal budget. And the federal budget was tabled 2 days after the provincial budget. Again, there was a lot of hype, I'll call it hype, in our in our world around what this would be a real pivot from the Trudeau era. We have a new prime minister now, a new finance minister. A lot of expectations were super high in terms of viewing this budget as transformational and again, a pivot from the past. Most coverage is saying that didn't happen. I'm obviously curious your take on that.
Yeah. So look, to me, it's a sign of the political inexperience of Prime Minister Mark Carney. One of the number one rules in politics is expectations management and lower expectations and then exceed them. He did the opposite. He raised expectations around this budget to say this is transformational, once in a lifetime opportunity for us to, build the Canadian economy and, all this type of stuff. Well, like you're never going to meet that because when you're talking about that in a way, people will project whatever their view of that is into whatever you're doing. And so he raised expectations so high that in my view, it was impossible for him to meet them. That said, I don't even think he met the basic conditions of this with this budget. It was a massive increase in spending. They will argue they've separated operating and capital in their budgets, and this is about investing money, and that they're finding savings. But really, there's modest reductions on the expenditure side after we've seen just a massive increase in the federal public service and the federal government spending over the last decade or so. And while it's welcome that there's investments in capital, there's some new funds that I think will help the construction sector. There is a commitment to these major projects that will help our Canadian economy. I don't believe that there was anything in there that was transformational. Like there was nothing really that new. There was some new tax credit that you can write down some of the expenditure costs that you're making in your business investment. But this was actually less than the same program that was released, 6, 7 years ago. So there wasn't a lot new in there. I think it was really kind of focused on continuing the legacy of the Justin Trudeau government and really shows this kind of internal debate that kind of continues within the Liberal Party around the fact that most of the caucus were Trudeau people, ran under a Trudeau brand, and were supportive of the Trudeau government and the prime minister. And he became very, very unpopular, obviously, and he stepped down and Carney came in promising change. But we really haven't seen that much change in the actual policies. There's a lot of rhetoric, but there hasn't been a lot of follow through, and certainly no changes to bills like the No Pipeline Bill C-69 that have been really stifling development across our country. Encouraging signs around some of these major projects, but kind of have to wait and see until things actually shovels are in the ground and start building.
So early 2025, the conversation with the Trump tariffs went to kind of an inward-looking discussion around why can't Canada get things built? Do we need to diversify our trading partners? How do we get resources to other markets? And that part of that discussion was talking about a regulatory environment. Why can't we get things done in Canada? And to your point about Bill C-69, it seems the response to that was the major projects list. So rather than actually amending or changing the broader kind of regulatory environment, they kind of superimpose this special list that gets adjusted from time to time. Again, it's still evolving, but I'm curious, is the manner in which they're going about this helpful to the provincial government? Does a province view this as a solution, or do they see this as insufficient?
It's a very good question. I'll kind of answer that by maybe situating that I think the approach that the Carney government has taken on matters such as economic development, major projects, etc., is one of government first, right? It's using government to try to achieve these outcomes, be it housing, be it with creating a new housing agency or a major projects division, as opposed to deregulation, allowing the private sector to lead the conversations and allow capital to and the market to work, right? And so instead of changing the regulations, they're saying we'll get government to get in a room and pick projects and we'll give them special treatment and off we go. I don't think that has worked anywhere really that has been tried. And so I really kind of question the approach of more government to solve government issues. But as it relates to the province, look, I think the province's position is this is better than nothing, right? I think the province would like the federal government to get out of the way. I think the province would like to see reductions to the lengthy delays and red tape that federal environmental assessment processes are breeding across projects and the uncertainty that that provides capital. But in absence of kind of that deregulatory and economic growth strategy, they're happy to see that there is an opportunity to push for some major projects. I think, what we've seen is some of the major projects that the province has put forward have had kind of, some of them have been well received, such as, Ring of Fire, some of the nuclear build outs. But the premier is still waiting for his 401 tunnel to be put on that list. That would be a massive infrastructure investment here in the city of Toronto, where I live. One that certainly at its outset, depending on the viability of the study that comes back, would seem to meet some of the needs that the feds are looking for. So I would say, the province is kind of encouraged by some movement, but I think they would love to see the federal government kind of take its hand off the wheel and allow the market to dictate where capital will be invested in major projects across the country, and not just have a government kind of knows all approach.
So PCA, obviously, one of our key concerns is fair and open tendering. And when we look at the budget, there's something called the Build Community Strong Fund, which is a $51 billion fund over 10 years, investing in local infrastructure. There is some concern around some of the language there. I'll read it out from the budget. It says these projects will grow a stronger economy and create thousands of good jobs, and federal project selection will consider factors such as the use of organized labor and the use of community employment benefit agreements. Curious your take. Obviously, the federal government isn't directly involved in too much procurement. So when they do provide funds, typically there's not a lot of strings attached. But in this case, it does appear that they want to be more active in the procurement discussion and managing some of the outcomes there. I'm curious kind of your take on how this will evolve. They obviously are during some of their investments in green energy. There's the tax credits involved in that. How do you view, I guess, the federal government's potential involvement in procurement?
Look, I think the federal government does not have a great track record in procurement writ large. If you look at, one of the challenges we have with our current Canadian military is we failed to procure the planes and vehicles and ships in a timely way. I think the federal government's great at a lot of things. We've seen a lot of scandals over COVID of procurement scandals as well. So look, I think first and foremost, in my view, folks closest to the delivery agent are the best to procure, be it provinces and municipalities. I think they know their areas better and are able to move quickly and more expeditiously than a federal government from Ottawa kind of telling people in Anatang or Simcoe County, what to procure and how. So I am kind of always of the view that is something to be concerned with. I do think also it is concerning the language that they use, because it does appear again of like the government is setting conditions that they think they know best, as opposed to allowing the market to dictate fair and open competition. I think all of the evidence is very, very clear on the importance of competition when it comes to quality and when it comes to efficiency and when it comes to getting things done on time. And if they are looking to limit competition, that will have a very detrimental impact on the ability to actually get money out the door in an effective and efficient way. And look, this is how we got into this mess in Canada in the first place, right? Getting back to your earlier comments around why were we so susceptible to Donald Trump's threats and tariffs? It's because we weakened our own economy through overregulation, lack of competition, a lack of an ability to realize where the wealth in our country is being generated from, and making sure that we have a vibrant and competitive economy that is not just a bunch of oligopolies of highly regulated industries, right? That's what we've become. And so I am concerned with this language because I do think it tells me that the government hasn't learned the lesson of how we got in this mess to make ourselves so vulnerable economically to the Americans. So certainly, I know this will be an effort that PCA will be looking to talk to the government about, push them on, make this public, make this known. I think, Canadians need to understand that these approaches just do not work. They do not work for our workers. They do not work for our economy. They do not work for anyone. And so, I hope this is an area that the government will kind of reconsider and ensure that there's fair and open competition in all their procurements.
So ending on more of a straight political discussion here, curious your take on the provincial government was reelected with an historic third majority term. Super rare in provincial politics. You had the Liberals winning again an historic election shortly thereafter with we'll call it a strong minority government. Curious, what are your takes? The province specifically didn't really make a lot of moves in terms of cabinet, in terms of change in approach after the election. Where do you see them going in the short term in terms of some of the key players at the cabinet table and federally as well? There was a lot of new folks introduced to cabinet with the Carney governments. Do you see potential changes there in the near term also?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think at the provincial level, one of the things Doug Ford's been really reticent to make massive changes to his cabinet. It's been pretty incremental that he's kind of shifted folks around. I do expect there to be some changes potentially after this fall legislative sitting ends and in around the Christmas break. He brought back more or less the same kind of cabinet after his, as I say, historic kind of reelection. I think it's always good for governments to change up ministers every little bit. From my experience, kind of working both in the federal and provincial governments, ministers and their staff can become captured by their bureaucracies they work with. They become to take on the identity of the bureaucracy the longer that they spend there. And I think that becomes dangerous politically. And so I hope that the Ford government kind of sees that and that it's good to shift things up. It helps kind of put new faces and new ideas on file. So I expect that to come. And at the federal level, I think you're starting to see that Mark Carney is trying to change the Liberal Party to be his party, not the Trudeau party. If you notice, question period in their remarks, they do not make any reference to previous actions that the Trudeau government took. They do not say we invested X or we did Y. They are all forward looking since Carney came in. And that is a deliberate strategy on his part to try to make a break from his predecessor. And you're seeing that with the faces that he's brought in around him. And while he kept on a number of cabinet ministers from the Trudeau era, there's lots of speculation that a few of them will be stepping down in the next few months and have by-elections to make room for new faces to come in. A lot of the speculation has been a lot of these people will take diplomatic appointments in true Liberal fashion. They send the ministers out to continue to work for the taxpayer abroad as opposed to getting jobs in the private sector like good conservatives do. So there's my partisan comment on that. But I do think you're seeing Carney kind of reshape the government, his image. Ministers that are very close to him. Two of them are, Minister Hodgson and Minister Solomon, who are brand new faces, people that he personally recruited, people that he brought in, people that he trusts. And you see with, someone like a Minister Jolie, who's been around for a long time, you don't see her out there a lot. You don't see her in the media. You don't see her doing a lot of press. I think this is indicative of his approach in terms of bringing new faces in and slowly sliding out some of the old faces.
Interesting. Well, Sam, thank you for joining us. Always a fascinating discussion with you, and hope to have you on again soon.
Yeah, anytime. This is fun.
Great. Thanks.